Hello, and welcome to The Control Band, the podcast where we break down workplace safety, industrial hygiene, and risk management into practical tools that you can actually use. If you've ever wondered why some organizations prevent incidents while others constantly react to them, the answer often comes down to one thing: systems. My name is Amy Stark, and this is Jobert. And in this show, we'll explore the strategies that keep workers safe, organizations resilient, and hazards controlled. Today, we're launching the podcast with our first episode, The Blueprint for Safety. Today, we'll talk about what a safety and health management system, or SHMS, actually is, why it matters, and why safety without structure almost always fails. Jobert. Okay, putting Jobert aside. So, many companies say that they have a safety program. They have the posters on the wall. They run annual training. And they might even have a safety committee. But when incidents happen, people ask the same question. How did this slip through the cracks? How did this happen? And the truth is, most workplace accidents don't happen because nobody cared about safety. They happen because safety wasn't managed as a system. Without structure, you'll find that hazards go unidentified, risks aren't prioritized, controls are inconsistent, training fades, and lessons aren't captured. And that's where the Safety and Health Management System, or SHMS, comes in. Think of SHMS as the operating system for safety, or OS. So SHMS is like the Windows or the Linux of safety. Instead of random safety efforts, everything connects to a framework that answers 4 critical questions. What hazards exist? How risky are they? How do we control them? How do we make sure the controls actually work? So SHMS frameworks revolve around 4 core elements. Think of them as the architecture of safety. Number 1 is management leadership. Safety must be visibly supported by leadership, not just through words, but through resources, priorities, accountability, and decision-making. If production always wins over safety, workers notice. The leadership sets the tone for safety. You have to have management buy-in. If you don't have management buy-in, then there's just no safety program. There's nothing there. The second pillar is worker participation. The people closest to the work see the hazards first. When I was an OSHA inspector, a large part of the inspection process was employee interviews and walking around with the employees to talk to them about what they saw on a day-to-day basis. Because employees are boots on the ground. They are the person who, or the people rather, who are closest to the hazard, who observe the hazard, and oftentimes who have really great ideas on how to control the hazards. So a strong SHMS program will invite workers to report the hazards that they see, suggest those controls that they have ideas for, participate in investigations, and help design procedures. You'll find that safety works best when it's built with the workers in mind and not imposed upon them. The third pillar is hazard identification and assessment. You can't control hazards that you don't recognize. And so this includes going out and doing inspections. It includes job hazard analyses, so evaluating the tasks for the risks. Sometimes this includes industrial hygiene monitoring, evaluating the exposure that a person is exposed to. I hate being repetitive, but the exposure that a person receives on a day-to-day basis can be evaluated through industrial hygiene monitoring. And think also about near-miss reporting. Near-miss reporting is so important when it comes to hazard identification because there is a triangle. And I oftentimes say that safety is a pyramid scheme because we have a lot of pyramids and triangles in our methodologies and analyses and controls. And so this particular triangle, says that for every 10,000 near misses that you have one fatality on average. So if you think about evaluating those near misses and identifying trends, you can prevent that fatality before it happens. And that's being proactive, looking for the hazard before the incident occurs. The fourth pillar is hazard prevention and control. So once the risks are known, we apply the controls to reduce those risks. And again, triangle time, only this time it's upside down, because there are essentially 5 elements to the what's called the hierarchy of controls. And we'll dig into the hierarchy of controls later on in this series, but it starts with elimination, substitution, engineering, administrative, PPE. And the hierarchy of controls is one of the most powerful tools in safety management, because relying on those controls helps reduce the risk to the employee by taking the exposure away from the employee, or taking I call it power away. You're not taking the power away from the employee. You're actually empowering the employee. But what you're doing is you are taking management of the risk and putting it either in a mechanical form, a administrative form, or in the employee's hands. So like I said, we'll do a deep dive into the hierarchy of controls later. But for right now, it is upside down pyramid time. So why do systems prevent accidents? Well, let's take a look at a quick example. And this is a real life example that happened to me. So I was observing an employee using a chemical, and the area that the chemical was being used in required use of a respirator. I was wearing a respirator while I was observing the employee, and then I left the area, but I had to go back real quick. So I went back real quick without my respirator on, and I just talked to him for like 5 minutes, and then I left the area. And later on that day, I had a nosebleed from a overly dry nose. So that was an example of where system is in place, but it wasn't being used. So, and the workers relied on only the respirators to control the exposure. There was ventilation in place, but the ventilation wasn't evaluated, and the exposure to the chemical wasn't measured in my case. I had what's called an acute exposure event. And so that event resulted in an incident investigation, but that's a reactive measure. There was an incident investigation because somebody made a choice I made the choice. I'll own up to it. I made the choice to go in without a respirator. And a stronger SHMS program would have resulted in a better understanding of the hazard, and it would have the hazard would have been identified during the task review. I went in, I just knew that I had to wear a respirator because everybody else was wearing a respirator. I didn't know why I had to wear a respirator. I didn't know the exposure potential because it wasn't evaluated. I didn't know that what the ventilation was controlling. And so a strong SHMS program will identify the hazard, exposure potential, evaluate the exposure potential, review the ventilation to make sure that it's adequately controlling the hazard, and perform air monitoring to confirm that there's an exposure reduction, and most importantly, train the workers on safe handling of the chemicals. So the difference between the two, what happened and what could have happened, is structure. So let's look at SHMS as a continuous cycle. Sometimes it's called plan, do, check, act. And sometimes it's called anticipate, recognize, evaluate, control. But the idea is simple. Safety is never finished. You never write your program, train your folks, evaluate the exposure, and then call it one and done. Because new risks emerge and processes evolve, hazards change, and strong systems you find will continuously improve to address those changes. So in conclusion, safety doesn't happen by accident. It happens by design. A strong safety and health management system creates that design. It creates a blueprint for identifying hazards, controlling risks, and protecting workers every single day. So in our next episode, we'll dive into the first step of that system, anticipating hazards before they happen. Because the best hazard is the one you prevent before it ever reaches a worker. So thanks for listening to The Control Band with your host and Jobert. Stay safe, stay curious, and remember, control the hazard.